Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Shelby Heggie, and I will be your moderator for today's session. Today's session, I'm so excited to share with you. It is on the future of data ops with Velotic. Before we get started, just a few things to touch on. First, this is intended to be an outline of our general product direction, and it shouldn't be relied on for making purchasing decisions. Our goal here is to show you our intent and strategic direction in this space. The other thing I just want to sound off on before we get started is a few bits of housekeeping. So in the webinar tool, you'll see a number of different options for how you can engage during this session. The first one is for entering questions. We will live answer these at the end, and I encourage you to drop them in there whenever you think of them. The second option is to contact our team. We also have some additional resources there for you. And then lastly, we have the opportunity to connect to a product manager, get technical assistance, or provide feedback on today's session with a survey. If at any point during this session you're having issues with the webinar tool, we encourage you to refresh your browser, as this is the best way to get back into the session. Now, without further ado, I will hand it over to our speakers for today. We have Steve Pavlosky, the General Manager for the Proficy business, alongside Abby Eon, the General Manager for ThingWorx and Kepware. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Shelby. Folks, glad to be here with you today, talking about this really important subject. For those of you who have seen me before, you know me as Steve Pavlosky. I led product management for GE Vernova, and now am pleased to be the general manager of the Proficy portfolio within Velotic. Abby, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Abby Eon. I'm the general manager for the Kepware and ThingWorx portfolios. I came in through the Kepware acquisition back in 2014, have been with it since, and very excited to be talking about this topic today. I know there's a lot of customer interest here.
Awesome. And I think let's talk a few minutes about Velotic. For those who are in our audience that may have heard about the creation of Velotic and sort of wondering who are we? From my perspective as someone who spent nearly 40 years in GE working in the industrial automation and software space, I am so happy to be part of Velotic. And the reason for that is it is a purpose-built company focused on software and technology, focused on helping our customers in the manufacturing and utility spaces improve their operations. 1,200 people, new headquarters being built out in Boston. It's just an exciting time to be part of this effectively launch of a brand new company, and then to have new coworkers from the Kepware and ThingWorx products like Abby. It's just we've built a world-class portfolio, and we're looking now at how do we bring all of that technology together to best meet the needs of our customers. So it's just a great business to be part of. Abby, why don't you share some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you'll hear our CEO say it's like the world's largest startup, but we come at it with 30 years, like literally decades of experience on the Proficy and Kepware side, having the trust of manufacturers to run operations and execution. So it's just, I came through the whole PTC journey, I'll say. I think ThingWorx and Kepware were very transformative technologies there, but also a big focus on engineering. So right now for me, being able to have, whether it's an engineer or, a salesperson or somebody in customer support, like see what they're doing day to day, like when they put their hands on the keyboard or pick up the phone and see exactly how it maps to the vision of the company. Like that's just super energizing. So I can say that, like Steve's saying, our employees are really jazzed up about that. It's the focus, it's the renewed investment. I'm super excited to be part of the Velotic journey.
Awesome. All right, well, let's talk a little bit. You're all here today to understand sort of our vision of data ops. Many of you had heard us talk about Data Hub over the course of the last year. And as we bring this portfolio together, I think our vision is changing a little bit. And as we think about data ops, right, our goal here is really to acknowledge and build solutions to help our customers take advantage of the data that our systems produce, right? And a couple of statistics here, right? This comes from a Deloitte survey, right? That 90% of survey respondents agree that smart manufacturing will drive competitiveness. And frankly, smart manufacturing relies on data and data in context. And yet only a few have deployed AI or analytic use cases at scale, right? And certainly within our business, we've seen that, right? We've had machine learning offerings. We have the entire Proficy portfolio. And as we've been maturing the portfolio and bringing that Proficy portfolio together, right, we embarked on the Data Hub journey to bring the data from our different applications together in a common context, right? And now with the advent of not generative AI, right, but in particular agentic AI, and the need to expose our data in context via standardized interfaces instead of having applications have to do point-to-point interactions with various servers, right? We see that there's this huge opportunity for layering a set of capability on top of the broad portfolio, which now includes the Proficy portfolio, Kepware and ThingWorx, right, to help solve this problem. And the problem is really just this spaghetti, right? PLCs, robots, DCSs, sensors, other factory floor systems, right, having had point-to-point connections and flat tag naming spaces within, say, PLCs, and bring that up into a SCADA or into a historian, and then perhaps overlaying a model in MES, right? That data and the complexity of interfacing with the various sorts of data has been one of the greatest barriers for adoption of these new technologies on the factory floor, right? And we can't rely on this type of architecture to support our customers in their journey to leverage AI-based technologies to unlock new insights, to provide new information to the operators and the line supervisors and the plant managers that help them drive better decision making. And so it's really time. All right, data ops as sort of a market, but data ops specifically for manufacturing is really the right time to be working in this area and helping our customers move forward. And as we think about how we deliver this, right, there's this layer architecture of sort of the sources and recipients of the data. Plant floor execution and the edge, where there's device connectivity, protocol translation, data acquisition, SCADA and HMI at the edge, work order execution, the sort of next layer up of data management and contextualization. Above that, right, production management, MES, work order, scheduling, orchestration, and then optimization and analytics, right? Our perspective is we need to weave all of that together, right, in a common context and enable closed loop control via an industrial data fabric. And that's really our sort of more mature vision of how we deliver on the promise of what Data Hub was going to be, which is how do we create a layer that spans all of these sublayers, right, and creates that single model, single contextual layer, and single point of connection for for moving that data upward to the enterprise and exposing it to AI-based infrastructures. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about our strategy and roadmap. A big piece of how we help customers as we go forward build and maintain a single contextual model is to start at the source of that data and potentially of that model, right? And so if we think about where data comes from in our portfolio, yes, we've got plant systems, MES, SCADA, ours or other people, right? But we also have Kepware, right? And our goal here is to make an investment that layers on top of that very rich data infrastructure, right? Delivering data via standards, whether it be traditional shop floor standards like OPC-UA and MQTT and SparkPlug-B, or more IT interfaces like REST and Kafka, or now i3x, which is a very interesting new standard, which we're taking a look at how do we implement on top of our portfolio and perhaps within our data fabric. And then lastly, MCP, right? And I'm sure there will be others over time, but there's this notion of taking data from proprietary sources, bringing it into and making it accessible via standards in a model context, right? And that model context includes, right, assets, tags, events, quality, sightline and cell, material data, order data, time series data, like bringing all that data together in a contextual frame so that now as the data moves up, whether it be into the BI tools or analytic tools or into the Proficy suite, our HMI SCADA or MES or storage and analytics with Historian CSense or the AIoT platform ThingWorx, which can then also take data from other business systems and combine it. We own now this top to bottom and deliver this top to bottom set of capability and this new center bridge of industrial data fabric really will help minimize the configuration time and deployment time of these systems, but also expose that data outside of the Velotic ecosystem to enterprise systems and analytics and BI tools and your cloud and lakehouse infrastructures, so that you can make more, create more value from that data. And it may be that you've got AI-based infrastructure within the plants that need access to that data, right? And that's the investment in MCP.
So I think one thing that's really interesting when we're looking at this view, and it's sure Velotic's a young company. We were launched officially in March, but when we first came together and we looked at all the products between Kepware and ThingWorx and Proficy, there's one common data challenge, and this is it. You could show this slide to basically any of the customers, and I'd say even though SCADA is a distinct market from IoT platforms, they all had this pain point, and they all were sketching something similar, right? They might call it a standardized data layer. So one of the pieces we did, and I remember getting so excited when I first heard about Data Hub and saw a little of that demo. But then we could also show you a very similar demo with ThingWorx, and we could talk to you about it in the Kepware Future Roadmap. So this was really the first time we got to come together as a cross-product team and think about here are the really common customer challenges. Here's what we're hearing. There's pretty much entirely overlap here, and how do we want to design for Velotic going forward?
That is absolutely the case, Abby. I do remember as we came together. That same, shared vision of a problem, right? We had different approaches, but that's really now as we're sort of 4 or 5 months into this journey of being Velotic. I think that's what's driving the maturation of the vision. I think the other piece here, and as we transition to the next slide, we've also recognized that there are different needs at the different layers. At the operations layer, at the sort of factory floor, at the machine, at the line, and versus at the enterprise layer, right? And at the operations layer, there's time criticality, and there's a particular scope and perhaps closed loop requirements and speed requirements that perhaps may not exist at the enterprise layer, which is much more about sharing configuration, sharing data across lines, across plants, and enabling those cross-enterprise analytical questions to be asked. And why does one product in one plant produced at a higher quality or at a higher efficiency than in another plant, right? So, but both are equally important, right? We have customers, thousands and thousands of customers sort of at the edge that play at that operations layer, and also customers with thousands of plants at the enterprise layer, and both needs need to be met, but they aren't going to be met with exactly the same set of capability. And so what our vision is really a structure in which we have a two-layer offering here for data ops. One at the operational layer, which can be federated across multiple operational instances, and an enterprise layer, which can handle the scale and the scope of sort of enterprise scale. So we're talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of, say, data points across hundreds of assets at the operational layer versus potentially millions of data points across thousands of assets at the enterprise layer. And the technology is different. It by nature can't, the exact same solution can't work for both. Either that enterprise solution would be too heavy at the operations layer, or the operations layer wouldn't scale the way the enterprise layer needs to scale. And so really part of our strategy here is how do we build a solution that works for our enterprise customers that both want to work at the operations layer at the edge and at the enterprise layer, and still support those customers that want to just sort of live within that operational layer context, and maybe sometime down the road move upward. And so really we're taking this architecture, and Abby's going to talk a bit more about the sort of the how we're going to do that. But really our goal here is how do we enable you to connect data? And we have the world's leading factory floor data connection solution, right? Create meaning and drive action based on that data, right? So advance from the trusted industrial connectivity that we have by overlaying a contextual model that can be used at the edge, at the operational layer, and then federate that data either across plants and across sort of operational layer deployments, or federate that data up to the enterprise.
And I think one of the things I wanted to add on to what Steve is saying here, when we think about the user experience, this will feel much more holistic, that we're also being, realistic around there are different types of, users and personas that interact with this. If you're at a real-time operational level, or you're trying to get more, enterprise personas that might have questions on business performance. But the piece on operational context in particular, and those constraints on real time, when we saw people coming out, maybe in the last 5 or 6 years, and there was a growing awareness of how important data was in terms of powering digital transformation and analytics at that point. So when we first started engaging with people who were looking at digital transformation strategies and thinking about how they were going to get data ready for, analytics at that point, what they're really engaged with was these next-gen architectures and a lot of tools that were more, let's call them wrap and extend, but really bolt-on. They had another piece of infrastructure they were bringing in to do this mapping and this contextualization. And therefore, the actual context was just inherently further from where the source was. And it created this challenge of you have to be able to update things in multiple places and sync things in multiple places. So if mapping wasn't hard enough, you're doing it in multiple places at this point. The other thing we saw at that time was a lot of focus on, how do I connect, collect, and bring that data up to get insights? And then usually human in the loop, I'm going to take an action. There are some closed loop workflows, but just given the latency a lot of times and the relative hesitation of putting cloud technologies really close to the control loop, that became very problematic. So a lot of these next gen architectures were very much, one way up and maybe human control back. I think what's really unique about the Velotic portfolio, especially with Proficy and Kepware coming together, is we are just market leaders within that control space, within automation and operations. So when we think about how our customers are going to use these standardized, single source of truth for where your data is, that's not going to just be going up to the cloud and informing broader decisions. That's also going to be real-time controls, actions, closed loop actions. And that's really a vision for Velotic and a unique differentiator. I mean, that's that whole stack experience that we want people to have. It's that closed loop feedback that we want. And we're looking at making that, one vendor. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So just to dig in on Kepware, I think most people on this webinar are probably familiar, but I did want to reset because in the last few years, we've been making a lot of investments for Kepware as a standardized connectivity layer with everything happening in digital transformation and how IT and OT are converging. So we have 4 key investment themes, especially going forward. So standardized connectivity I just mentioned, contextualization and modeling. That's fairly basic in the offering today. We do have people getting creative. Secure integrations and then scale deployments and managing. We've put a lot of investment in enterprise management with a single pane of glass to manage large landscapes. But I want to click in here on the contextualization and modeling because that's really where we see the differentiation coming down of bringing that operational context that we're talking about into this product and evolving that towards the future. Okay, so what does that look like in practice? Laying this out here, you can see we have essentially what becomes a data foundation. And this is where our operational context is applied. It's part of the Kepware portfolio is powering this. I do want to stress, Kepware is a product line, so there will still be different offerings for people who need to solve just a challenge of connecting, an asset to a screen, as well as bringing forward like a broader connectivity and data foundation. But the piece that you see in contextualize here, this is where heavy investments are going. You'll also see we start talking about agentic AI and chatbots because that's what this industrial data fabric and being able to bring that into the offering that we have for Kepware today and bring that to the future. Like those are the things that are going to lock up. So you'll see a lot happening at once, both with the context piece and then being able to open new standards and also be able to open, context like MCP to be able to share that data over a wider breadth of open standards and interact with Kepware in new ways and more rapidly configure than you could in the past. And so if I just step back from our data foundation and our Kepware vision here, just to orient on everything we just talked about on how we are thinking about approaching this. So we said upfront, we certainly have products, like ThingWorx today that people do use for a lot of these capabilities in a standalone fashion. But what we're talking about here is this Velotic vision. It's, us sitting in that room thinking about how we're solving it together. And those are the steps we see here. We have readied the data and we have great tooling and technology to do that today. It's a real differentiator. It is necessary just for AI to make sure that we have the connection and that we have good quality data. We're talking a lot around creating that context at scale. So as we think about the operational context and the enterprise context that comes into that, as we think about more around our unified namespaces and whether that's exposed at a site or that's exposed across an enterprise. And then on that third piece, from an enterprise context, making sure that you have the tools to govern and to make sure that things are trusted and secure. Like that will be such a critical part, especially when it comes to feeding AI, of making sure that data is, trusted, governed, secured, and understood. And that's really where Velotic is going to put the emphasis and evolve the portfolio. So why build your industrial data fabric with Velotic? And there's a few things I want to touch on here. One is this unified model that we're talking about. And just the idea that today we're creating these models in so many different systems, right? Like we're defining a configuration here, maybe it's a third party, and now we have, new data ops tools that are bolting on and extending. So you have multiple places that you're doing this mapping. You have multiple configurations you're trying to keep in sync across that. And it's just really not a cohesive experience. So one of the things for Velotic is we're very passionate about being the world's largest independent software company for industrial software. And I want to stress that because independent interoperability are extremely important. I think that's a big piece of when you're looking at data fabric tools and providers that you want to be looking at to make sure that you have that future-proof aspect of it. And at the same time, we remain that way with our Velotic products too, right? Like we're playing in distinct markets. We have distinct value props. If I look at something like Kepware versus, plant apps versus ThingWorx, at the same time with this unified model, that's bringing that context together. And that's our better together strategy there. So you don't have to buy all our products, but if you happen to buy our products, they are going to work better together. They are going to allow you with this data fabric powering it to ask a question in one product in natural language and get an answer that has the richness of all of that operational and enterprise context. So you can ask about production orders and find out about machine data. That's the real vision here of keeping things so that it's one model, you have one vendor, and you're not having to remap and reorder and keep things in sync. And then the other piece, I kind of stressed on the operational context and how we have such a presence in automation and controls today. But I do want to say, 30 years of experience, when I think about both the Kepware and Proficy portfolios in particular, just industry expertise. Steve, I think, mentioned he spent a few of his years at GE up front. But it is we have entire, employee populations that have been very deeply involved in these spaces and have the industry expertise. So they're bringing that into the products, which is coming into the context that you're getting to leverage. So whether it's, best-in-class support, product experiences, this is a focus that we really have when we think about our industrial data fabric. So it really is around, once you have these things working, deploying faster and scaling faster and making sure that it's really easy to maintain that solution. Steve, did you have anything you wanted to add on this?
I would just amplify that notion of, for the Proficy customers or the Kepware ThingWorx customers or the Velotic portfolio customers, having the configuration and the model context for a data fabric or data ops platform that comes from the configuration of the operational systems. It's sort of one and the same and shared, right, is dramatically different than what bolt-on solutions could provide. And so, yes, and when you couple that with that notion of interoperability and yes, extensibility to other data sources and other systems, both through industry standards and in terms of those languages and protocols, right? You get the best of both worlds using, building up that industrial data fabric using our vision and our technology, both the easiest, as you articulated, right? The fastest to deploy, the easiest to maintain, and the fastest to scale, right? It's just that combined vision of data ops, data fabric with the operational systems, I think is something unique in the marketplace from a vision and from an execution delivery perspective.
Well put. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the content we wanted to share today. We're going to move over to Q&A. So I will bring Shelby back on to do a quick reminder of how that works. We'll go from there.